Right now, on YouTube, young Americans are posting their so-called World War III outfit checks, picking out camouflage jackets and bomber coats, joking through their anxiety the way this generation always does. The comment sections are full of dark humor, nervous laughter, and a quiet question nobody wants to type out loud. Meanwhile, a real war is being waged in the Persian Gulf, and when a reporter asked the President of the United States when it would end, he said he would know when he feels it, in his bones. Not when a treaty is signed, not when a flag comes down, not when the shipping lanes reopen. When he feels it. That is the operating framework inside which 2,200 Marines are currently sailing toward the Strait of Hormuz. On the 14th day of this conflict, the Pentagon confirmed the deployment of a Marine Expeditionary Unit aboard the USS Tripoli, an amphibious assault ship based in Japan, now moving toward the Gulf of Oman. The unit carries helicopter gunships, armed infantry, special operations teams, armored vehicles, and landing craft designed to put soldiers directly onto hostile shorelines. The deployment was requested by U.S. Central Command and personally approved by the Secretary of Defense. It was not announced as an escalation. It was announced as a plan. The stated objective is to help reopen the strait. The unstated reality is far more significant. 2 weeks of the most concentrated American air campaign since the Second World War have not reopened it, and so the Marines are coming. This moment matters because it marks a transition in the character of this conflict that no official press conference has been willing to name directly. What began as an air operation, jets, drones, and standoff missiles engaging Iranian military infrastructure from altitude, from safe distances, from the clean geometry of the sky, is now becoming something else entirely. The language of the mission has shifted, and when the language of a military mission shifts, the consequences that follow tend to be very difficult to reverse. Marines are not bomber crews. They are not surveillance operators watching screens from a base thousands of miles away. They are infantry. They carry rifles. They are the people you send when a target cannot be destroyed from altitude, when something needs to be seized, held, or physically contested on the ground. Their presence changes the nature of everything that comes after them. To understand what 2,200 Marines are sailing into, you need to understand what the Strait of Hormuz actually looks like as a military environment, not as it appears on a briefing map, but as it functions in operational reality. The strait is 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. On one side is Iran, with a coastline stretching hundreds of kilometers along the eastern edge of the Gulf. On that coastline, Iran has spent decades positioning anti-ship missile batteries in hardened installations, underground bunkers, and mobile launchers designed specifically to target naval vessels transiting those waters. These are not improvised weapons. These are precision coastal defense systems with ranges measured in hundreds of kilometers. A launcher positioned well inland from the Iranian coast can still reach a ship in the center of the strait. The mathematics of that geography does not change regardless of what is said at any podium. The United States has struck more than 15,000 Iranian military targets since the 28th of February, 2026. The question that no press conference has fully answered is this: did those strikes destroy Iran's coastal missile infrastructure or simply force it to relocate? Because relocating is not the same as being destroyed, and in the language of military planning, the difference between those two outcomes is everything. Mobile launchers do not stay where satellites photographed them last year. They move, they disperse, they shelter in underground facilities and emerge when needed. Destroying a single launcher requires one precision strike. Destroying every launcher, every storage site, every trained crew across hundreds of kilometers of rugged coastline, that is an entirely different order of magnitude. It is the precise military problem that must be resolved before any commercial vessel can safely transit those waters at scale. And it is a problem that 2 weeks of intensive bombing have not yet solved. On the 14th day of this war, the Secretary of Defense stood at a Pentagon podium and described Iran's leadership as broken, underground, cowering. He said the country's air force was gone, its navy was gone, its missile production lines were defeated. He claimed that Iran's new supreme leader, appointed just 1 week earlier following the death of his predecessor, was wounded, likely disfigured, and unable to appear publicly. He offered no photograph, no medical report, no intelligence assessment read into the record. He pointed to the absence of a video address as evidence, then called Iran's leaders rats. The word was deliberate. It was not a slip. 1 hour later, in Tehran, a public rally drew tens of thousands of people into the streets for the annual Al-Quds Day commemoration. Standing visibly at at that rally were Iran's president and the head of its Supreme National Security Council, the same official who, 10 days earlier, had threatened to shut down electricity across the entire Middle East within 30 minutes if the United States struck Iran's power infrastructure. Neither man was underground, neither man was hiding, neither man was behaving like someone whose government was being dismantled. Both stood in broad daylight in public in the capital of the country the Pentagon had just described as being eliminated at a pace the world has never seen. That gap between what was said at the podium and what was happening simultaneously in the streets of Tehran is the most accurate measure of where this conflict actually stands on its 14th day. It is not a gap in rhetoric, it is a gap in reality. And into that gap, the United States is now sailing 2,200 Marines. The shipping numbers tell the story more honestly than any statement from any official on any side. Only 77 vessels have transited the Strait of Hormuz so far in March 2026. In the same period just 1 year earlier, 1,229 ships made that same passage. That is a collapse of approximately 94%. More than 1,000 cargo ships are currently anchored and holding positions outside the strait, waiting for a signal that has not come. The global maritime insurance market has effectively withdrawn. Major shipping companies will not send crews into those waters at any price the current global economy can sustain. Oil prices have swung between $88 and $117 per barrel over the past 2 weeks, reacting to every statement from every official on every side. The United States has released 400 million barrels from its strategic petroleum reserve in an attempt to suppress prices. That reserve is finite. The release buys time. It does not create a solution. The only thing that solves this problem is the strait reopening. And the strait has not reopened. Not on day 1, not on day 7, not on day 14. European nations, including Germany, France, and Italy, have stopped waiting for American-led naval escorts. They are speaking directly with Tehran, negotiating their own passage rights on their own terms. India has gone further, reportedly securing a bilateral arrangement allowing 2 liquefied petroleum gas tankers through the strait through direct discussions with the Iranian government. Countries that are formally aligned with Washington are quietly negotiating with the country Washington is actively bombing every single day at what the Pentagon describes as the most intense pace in modern military history. This is what Iranian strategy looks like when it is functioning as designed. Not battlefield victory, not military superiority in a direct confrontation, political fragmentation, the quiet erosion of coalition solidarity, one private bilateral conversation at a time. Iran does not need to defeat the American military to achieve this outcome. It only needs to keep the strait closed long enough for the economic pressure on the outside world to exceed the political tolerance of the governments conducting the campaign. Every European phone call to Tehran is evidence that this approach is working. U.S. Central Command acknowledged to Congress this week that planners had not fully built out a contingency for Iran actually following through on closing the strait. It was listed as a possibility. It was not the foundation of an operational plan. The plan assumed speed. It assumed that Iran's newly appointed leadership would lose public legitimacy quickly, that domestic discontent would surge, that the conflict would resolve itself in a matter of days. The president himself said 4 days, maybe a week, a clean, decisive campaign, a fast outcome. On day 14, the Marines are boarding ships. There is a precise logic to the deployment of a Marine Expeditionary Unit, and that logic communicates more honestly than any prepared statement. You do not send this kind of force to a theater where the air campaign has already delivered its objectives. You send it when the air campaign has not delivered a specific objective, and that objective now requires physical presence. On the ground, in the water, on a contested and hostile shore. The MEU's deployment is not a sign of strength building on success. It is a response to a specific failure that cannot be addressed from the air. The MEU can conduct helicopter-borne assaults, execute contested beach landings, and establish defensive perimeters in hostile territory faster than virtually any other American military unit. It is specifically designed for missions like this: seizing or neutralizing positions near narrow maritime corridors, screening commercial shipping from missile attack, and holding ground while other forces consolidate. It is also, in the wrong conditions, one of the fastest American military formations to suffer casualties when the defensive threat threat it faces has not been properly neutralized in advance. The Treasury Secretary said this week that naval escorts for commercial vessels through the strait could begin soon, but only after military operations first target the land-based anti-ship missiles Iran has positioned near the waterway. The sequencing is rational. The problem is that Iran has had 2 full weeks to observe American targeting priorities and respond accordingly. Every mobile launcher that was in a documented fixed position on the 27th of February is now somewhere else. The intelligence picture that existed before the campaign began, built over years from satellite imagery, signals, intercepts, and human sources, has been partially invalidated by the movement of the very assets it was designed to track. The Marines on USS Tripoli are not being sent into a cleared environment. They are being sent to force the creation of one. That distinction matters enormously for the people aboard that ship. The United States has placed a $10 million bounty on Iran's new supreme leader through the State Department's Rewards for Justice program. 9 other senior Iranian officials have been added to the same list, including the intelligence minister, the interior minister, and the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The American government is now publicly offering money for information on the location and condition of a man whose status it cannot independently confirm. In a private call with G7 leaders this week, the president reportedly said that Iran's supreme leader is not in good shape and that no one knows who is actually in charge, meaning there may be no authority capable of announcing a surrender even if the desire to do so existed. Read that sentence carefully. The leader of the most powerful military in human history told the heads of the world's 7 largest economies that his war has reached a point where the opposing side may not have the functional command structure required to end it. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has its own institutional interests in continuing this conflict. It does not take direction from a man whose location is unknown and whose physical condition is unconfirmed by any independent source. The American envoy sent a message through Oman. The response came not through diplomatic backchannels but from a public stage in Tehran, in front of tens of thousands of people, on camera, in daylight. On the same day, the Pentagon said Iranian leaders were hiding underground. The answer was no. The strait stays closed. The war continues. The only acceptable conclusion, from Iran's stated position, is American military withdrawal from the region entirely. Iran is not Afghanistan. That comparison deserves to be stated plainly. Afghanistan was a 21-year conflict fought against non-state actors in landlocked mountainous terrain, armed primarily with rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, and improvised explosive devices. Iran possesses ballistic missiles with ranges covering the entire Gulf region, drone boat swarms designed for maritime corridor denial, sea mines, and a dense coastal anti-ship missile network built and refined over decades specifically to deny access to this waterway. It maintains a proxy infrastructure running from Iraq through Lebanon into Yemen. Its population, according to American intelligence assessments, has not moved against its government and shows no meaningful signs of doing so. Iran also holds something Afghanistan never possessed: direct physical control over the world's most strategically critical energy corridor, and the demonstrated willingness to weaponize that control as leverage against every nation on Earth that requires petroleum to function. It does not need to win a conventional military confrontation. It only needs to hold the strait closed long enough for the cost of keeping it open to exceed what any coalition of governments can politically sustain. That calculation is not abstract. It is playing out right now in the shipping data, the insurance markets, the oil prices, and the quiet phone calls between European capitals and Tehran. 2,200 Marines are sailing toward the strait. 13 Americans are already dead. The most intense single day of bombing in this campaign has been announced and confirmed. A public bounty has been placed on a man whose location remains unknown to the government offering the reward. Commercial shipping has collapsed by 94%. Treasury officials say escorts could begin soon. The coastal missiles that those escorts would need to avoid have had 2 weeks to move. On YouTube, the comment sections are filling up. The joke is about picking the right jacket. At the Pentagon podium, the claim is that the enemy is underground, cowering, wounded, and broken. In the streets of Tehran, tens of thousands gathered in full daylight with every camera rolling, while senior government officials stood and waved at the crowd. The message sent from that square to Washington was not subtle. We are still here. We are still standing. Your bombs have been falling for 2 weeks, and we are still in the street. One side has a gut feeling. The other has a strategy. The strait is still closed. The bones have not felt it yet, and the Marines are still sailing.